Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University in Shanghai, where the四海为学Collaborative Learning Project is based. I want to welcome you to our 18th roundtable and our 73rd event since 2022. Today we are hosting Professors Mercedes Valmisa from Gettysburg College, David Chai from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and David Zappulli from Hokkaido University. Our chair today is Vivian Dong from the University of California at Santa Cruz. It has become a tradition here at四海为学to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there are any younger scholars in the audience who wish to be part of future events, please email me. This event today will be 2 hours total, ending promptly at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Vivian, I just want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices sometimes found in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and look at me, I'm smarter than you, or don't I know so much, and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be somewhat of a counterbalance for the negative attitudes that can be found in so-called blind views. While there is certainly a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity, communication in academia should have just as much time and place for speaking to one another on more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea of 四海为家at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchanges by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So before introducing our chair today, I want to once again thank everyone for being here. Our chair is Vivian Yadi Dong. She is a PhD student in the Department of Philosophy at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She specializes in social philosophy, aesthetics, and ethics. Her current research focuses on feminist philosophy and art criticism, evaluating the intersection of aesthetics and moral problems in Western female nude art, work that was presented at the ASA in 2024. Her ongoing research also includes developing a theory of nomadic injustice that examines how institutions shape collective memory and historical narratives, which is funded by the THI Summer Pathway Fellowship 2025. Thank you for hosting, Vivian. The screen is yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivian. I'm very honored to chair today's roundtable. So here's today's format. We'll have 3 rounds. In each round, one speaker will give a 10-minute presentation, followed by 2 short discussions. First with one speaker for 8 minutes, and then with the other for another 8 minutes. We'll follow this format for all 3 speakers. After that, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion with the audience for the remaining time. So as a chair, I will help keeping time, jumping in as needed to give reminders and coordinating with the flow of discussion. So before starting, let me introduce our 3 excellent speakers today based on the sequence of their talks. So our first speaker, Professor David Chai. David Chai is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He is series editor of Taoism and the Human Experience, published by Bloomsbury Academic, the author editor of 7 books, and the author of nearly 50 papers. Professor Chai's primary areas of research are early and medieval Chinese philosophy and comparative philosophy. Our second speaker, Professor Mercedes Valmisa. Mercedes Valmisa is Associate Professor of Philosophy of Gettysburg College. Drawing on Chinese philosophy and other cross-cultural resources, she develops an account of agency that is relational, collective, and distributed rather than centered on self-contained individual. She's the author of the book Adapting a Chinese Philosophy of Action, published by Oxford University Press in 2021, and the book All Things Act, published by Oxford University Press in 2025. Okay, our last speaker today, Dr. Davide Zappulli. David recently obtained his PhD from the University of British Columbia and is currently a research fellow at Hokkaido University. I should also mention that I've known David since 2024. We met at an aesthetics conference in the US, and I'm very glad to see him here today. So in September 2026, David will join the School of Philosophy at Fudan University as a postdoctoral fellow. David's research engages early Chinese thought through an analytic philosophical lens, connecting it with debates in the contemporary philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, and metaphysics. Recently, she has mostly been interested in questions concerning the nature of creativity and creation. Okay, so these are our three speakers' short bio, and let us welcome our first speaker, Professor Chai. Okay, I will help you tracking time.
Okay, thank you very much, Vivian, for sharing this roundtable. I guess good afternoon to you, good evening to Mercedes, good morning to David, and good morning to Paul. Congratulations, Paul, on this, your 73rd, you said, yeah, roundtable. So we're getting up to 100, keep at it. Very successful series. And look forward to future talks and roundtables. Today, the topic of the roundtable, metaphysics and ontology, and in Zhuangzi, a very large topic, impossible for us to cover in 2 hours. I think we need many, many days. So the brief amount of time that I have, I won't talk about anything specific. Rather, I just want to share with listeners, with viewers, the primary reason why I got interested in Zhuangzi and metaphysics, why I use the term ontology in almost all of my writings. So just a very brief kind of remarks about this. So metaphysics, those of you who know Taoist philosophy or Neo-Taoism, 玄学, traditionally it's attributed to the commentators Wang Bi, maybe even Guoxiang, but also He Yan, who is a contemporary of Wang Bi. And primarily the discussion revolves around the two Chinese concepts, You and Wu, which have been translated variously as being, non-being, or presence, non-presence, something, nothing, this kind of thing. But actually, if we go back to the I Ching, to Tao Te Ching, to Zhuangzi, we find quite a lot of discussion around topics, themes that are very metaphysical in nature. So although we don't have a specific term, 形而上 or 形而下, we do have a strong interest in the workings of the universe, the human place in the universe, the significance of human life, and all the things that revolve around that. So my interest in metaphysics and Taoism, and specifically in this Greek term ontology, which derives from the root meon. In the Gorgias of Plato, we see the the first instance of this. Méon literally means the study of what is not, or non-being. So I've used this to kind of serve as a rebuttal to a Kyoto school thinker. He was a disciple of Nishida Kitaro, and he goes by the name of Hisamatsu Shinichi. And he's the one who came up with this concept of oriental nothingness. So when I was doing my PhD thesis and reading, of course, a lot of Taoist philosophy and Western thinkers, and there was much discussion about nothingness, non-being, and so on, I came across an essay, a very famous essay by Shinichi, who has quite nationalistic undertones. And I found this a very curious thing to say, that there is an oriental nothingness, but it was specifically a kind of Japanese take on that. And Shinichi, he has 5 characteristics or properties of what he is calling oriental nothingness. Very quickly, one, it's an absolute negation of being. So this is tied very much to what Hegel understands by nothingness, in German, das Nicht. So literally what is not, which is, of course, the Greek understanding. The second property or characteristics is that nothingness, in Japanese mu, in Chinese wu, is a negative predicate, so in a grammatical sense. The third would be that it's an abstract concept. The fourth is that it's some figment of one's imagination, that things don't exist. And the fifth one is that it's a form of unconsciousness, so in a Buddhist sense. So these are 5 very diverse readings or understandings of the concept of nothingness. For Shinichi, who is a member of the Kyoto school, is going to be a kind of Hegelian, Kantian Buddhist. So the word meontology in Western scholarship, I'm certainly not the originator of this. We find it used by Charles Fu, Thomas Fang Dongmei. He uses meontology in some of his papers. We find it in Western philosophical discussion, such as Emmanuel Levinas and a few others. So I thought we have all these different people talking about nothingness, but in a sense that doesn't really apply to Taoism. So my impetus for using meontology to speak about Taoist metaphysics, specifically nothingness, is to kind of to address the lacuna or the oversight or the ignoring of a central theme for me of Taoist philosophy. So I've used meontology as a kind of catchword because there is some resistance in the field to using Western notions such as non-being or nothingness or what have you, negation, to define the Chinese concept of wu. And why I choose this word meontology, because for me it has positive meaning, and we can apply it in a very positive sense, by which I mean nothingness is not a form of nihilism, it's not a form of annihilation, it's certainly not negation, but it's the counterpart to you as being, as something, as presence, however we want to define it. Now, why I say it has positive significance, because in Taoist metaphysics, when we're talking about themes such as life and death, temporality, change and transformation, things broadly, cosmology, cosmogony, human emotions, music, art, aesthetics, all of these contain elements of wu, of nothingness, or lack of presence of things, but in a very positive contribution type of application. So a lot of what I do in terms of explaining or writing about Taoist metaphysics is to uncover this somewhat hidden presence of Wu in the discourse. Another reason I want to do that is as a counter to Confucian discussion of philosophy of human life, the significance of human life, which is essentially focused on human being as such. And Taoism is not so much about the ontology of human person, human being in a gender sense, a social sense, political sense, what have you. In Taoism, human being is as a member of Wan Wu, the myriad things, all things in the universe. We need to learn how to let go of this ego-based or egocentric way of viewing human selfhood, human personhood. So for me, using nothingness as a platform or my ontology as a platform allows me to explore aspects of human life in ways that I try and I hope are not bound to very narrow, these days, outdated modes of discussing all the different experiences that comprise human existence. So just some very general remarks, and later for the discussion we can go into specifics of my work and how it relates to the work of Paul, who has also written quite a lot on this topic, Mercedes as well, and David, and others in the audience. So I will stop there and turn the floor over to other panel members. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chai. So yeah, now let's welcome Professor Valmisa to have a 8 minutes discussion with Professor Chai.
All right. How, David? How are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. Congrats again on your second book.
No, thank you. Thank you.
I enjoyed reading it very much.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So maybe we can talk about that another time.
Yes.
So, well, you gave very general remarks, right? So, about your approach to Wu in Taoism, I agree with you that the features of Oriental nothingness that you have listed, they have nothing to do definitely with, or they have very little to do with the concept of Wu in Taoism. So I really appreciate like you extending that Oriental nothingness with new features and so on. But I think in the school, the Kyoto school, there are other philosophers that talk about Mu in a way that is more generative, in a way that has more like coming from the Zen tradition that has incorporated Taoism within, and that seem to be more aligned with the Taoist notion or the Zhuangzi notion of Wu, right? So do you see, that would be my first question, do you see some connections there in other people, other Kyoto School philosophers, how they talk about Mu in ways that are more congenial, more coherent with your own account of nothingness?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in Kyoto School philosophy. I would agree. Yes, there are later thinkers who are not as radical as Shinichi. He is a second generation Kyoto School thinker. Of course, he has his own private motivations for putting forward this doctrine of so-called Oriental nothingness. The time period in which he lived, he's trying to put forward a kind of unique Japanese stamp on this, essential Western idea. He's not discussed a lot in the literature, perhaps because of his nationalistic tendencies. He was a political figure and so on, not really a philosopher. But for me, the very little I know of the Kyoto School is they are, I don't want to mischaracterize, they are heavily influenced by Kant and Hegel in
Yeah.
terms of understanding Mu or Wu as nothingness. More broadly speaking, I think there are a lot of parallels with Taoism, this common ground, even though they are talking about Buddhism. But in the specific concept of nothingness, I don't see any Kyoto School thinker, and I hope people will correct me if I'm wrong, who portray Mu or Wu in a positivistic sense, if we can use that word to speak of the Taoist understanding of nothingness. Now, again, you will be on a panel with Chris Fraser, Fabian Heubel, maybe Paul to a lesser extent, Hans-Jürgen Müller, Robin Wong, other scholars who have written, Jilu Liu, who have written about nothingness, maybe are not as generous in giving it such a how to say, a warm reception as I am. I'm a bit on the fringes in saying, oh, nothingness is a vital part of life and of reality, and we should really focus more on that and not fear it, in terms of death as the ultimate annihilatory nothingness. No, if you read Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, to a lesser extent, I Ching, more so the commentaries on these texts, there's a lot of discussion. But very few of us in the Anglophone world are really making use of this resource, the commentaries to these texts. In Xuanxue philosophy, of course, you all know that Wu becomes part of the debate. Even with later, in Jin Dynasty, the early Buddhists, Jizang, Zhidun, Sangjiao, and so on, because it's part of the Buddhist discourse. So they won't say nothingness is positive because then you're going against Buddhism, right? So the Kyoto thinkers, yeah, there would be some commonality in the later branch of it, but the early thinkers, I think they are too Hegelian, too Kantian to be open to such an idea that nothingness actually is contributing positively or neutrally, if you like, to reality as we know of it.
Do I have time to reply?
Yeah, I think we still have like 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining.
Okay. So I think I have I suppose, a different reading of the role of Mo, even in the first generation, even if you're thinking of Nishida. If you think about the notion of absolute place, no, Basho, which is this of place that is the absolute nothingness, right? The nothingness that is not relative to yo anymore, to presence or being, but the nothingness, which is that space actually that allows for everything that is determinate to be. And that if what allows for things to be, what can generate all kinds of determinations cannot be a thing itself, right? And that's why it's an empty space, right? And how it's described. For me, that's a very positive account of nothingness, in which is like the source of being, but not the source in a sense of logical priority that first there is nothing and then it creates being, but that is coextensive and simultaneous with it, that that without which there could not be things, right? In the sense of a thing is something that is determined and exclusive of other things, right? So even there, I already see like a nothingness that is generative, that is positive, that is, in the way I'm seeing it, coherent with Taoist Wu. And I think it's kind of, like part of the tradition, right? Like Taoist Wu is already incorporated in how they're reading Mu. So for me, it's more like, I don't think I read Zhuangzi through a Kyoto school lenses, but rather that the Kyoto school is already incorporating Zhuangzi, right? Or a particular reading of the Zhuangzi in it. That's my take, but still, like, I would like to hear, and probably with other discussions, like more details about what are those positive features that you attribute to Taoist nothingness that would make it more unique and different from. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to pause here and shift to Dr. Zappulli, David's turn with Professor Chai. Like, you have 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. And thank you, David, for the presentation. I enjoyed it. So I think that the point that I want to bring out connects very well to the discussion you were having with Mercedes. And so in your work, like you make the distinction between ontic non-being and ontological nothingness. And like if I understand correctly, then you have this ontological nothingness is like the fundamental kind of that I don't want to say exists, but it's like prior to the myriad things, while ontic non-being is like the absence that is part of what makes it possible for beings to be what they are. And so like now you're making this consideration that like you have a positive understanding of me ontology, and I'm wondering the extent to which, the positive sense of nothingness is actually different for ontic non-being and for ontological nothingness. So maybe ontic non-being is positive in the sense that is contributing to making, I don't know, this particular glass, the particular glass that it is, while for ontological nothingness, like some people like Yao Zhihua in your department, I think they have these parallels with Heidegger being, right? And so it seems like a different sense in which it's a positive nothingness. So if you could comment on that, I would find it helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I don't want to speak about Heidegger today. Yeah, so my not to get too technical or off topic, because we are interested in Taoist metaphysics in this roundtable, and nothingness is perhaps the core, the pillar of that, for me at least. I think for the two of you, you wanted to speak about natural principle, Tianli, so I hope we can get back to that. For me, Wu, the problem is the resistance of translating it as non-being or nothingness. It seems that many colleagues in Taoist studies are strongly opposed to using these terms. Why? Because they're Western terms. And they would say, oh, ancient China doesn't have ontology. Oh, it doesn't have cosmogony, all of that stuff. Nonsense. Of course they do. But they're presenting it in a very different way, using different ideas, different arguments, and so on, cultural values to frame this perspective. So Meontology for me is kind of an umbrella term. It's not limited to ontic non-being, which is a lack, as you very correctly said, or ontological nothingness. I would also use the word generative nothingness or ontogenerative nothingness. This is a problem with language, right? We're limited by concepts. So I'm talking about two orders of the same thing. But it's like Russian dolls. They're nested within each other. You can't say there is ontic nothingness and not ontological nothingness. It's the same thing. It just depends on your perspective. So ontic non-being, as Wu, simply refers to something that is no longer present. So it's a lack, but it's different from xu as emptiness or kong as emptiness. And I use ontological nothingness to speak of the nothingness of Tao. How does Tao create things? Tao is as a Zao, right? As the creator. Well, we don't want to get into discussion of creation ex nihilo, that the Tao is creating out of this Hegelian absolute void or an ancient Greek absolute void. That's not what Taoism is about. It's very clear in the text. It's clear in the commentaries that before there was heaven and earth, there was Tao. Before there were things, there was nothing other than the Tao. So how do you explain that? So I come up with this idea of, well, there's this I use the word milieu, right? It's not an empty void, but a realm of possibility, creative possibility, which is nothingness at the ontological level. And then once you get to the level of things, the generation and death of things, that's at the ontic level. If you destroy something, it vanishes, that's ontic non-being. It ceases to be. But ontic non-being is part of ontological non-being. It's the same thing. So it's a regeneration, right? That's why I say it's positivistic, because it's all about the cycle of presence and non-presence, of being and non-being, birth and death. It's cyclical. It's continuous. So the problem with just limiting Wu to non-being or to nothingness is that I'm excluding the other half of the understanding, and I don't want to do that, and that makes it a bit tricky. And then one of the drawbacks is that it makes it a bit controversial for certain colleagues. Oh, you can't speak of Taoism in this way. Oh, you should speak of it in that way. So yeah, maybe I dig a hole for myself, but unless somebody can offer a better solution, I think I'm stuck with that.
I see. Do I have time to talk a bit more,
2 minutes
Vivian?
left.
Okay, so no, thank you, David. I'm actually like very sympathetic to the way you use terms, and like I find it very helpful to understand the metaphysics of the text. So I just wanted to ask you one more quick thing about the the idea of ontological nothingness being a realm of possibility. So would you see like the process by which kind of Tao generates the myriad things to be a process of kind of constraining possibility into actuality or something like that? Is that a fair characterization in your understanding?
Well, yeah. So I would say ontic non-being is the nothingness within things, and ontological nothingness is the nothingness around things, or the nothingness within which things emerge. Uh, so I use an analogy, and forgive me if it's inappropriate, say of the womb. So a fetus is born within the womb, the mother's womb, and the womb is a nothingness. It's not an emptiness, it's a nothingness within which life is formed. When the delivery is successful, the baby emerges into the world, that nothingness of the womb, it continues to exist, right? But the baby is now living in a different kind of nothingness. This is what I would call the ontological nothingness. This is the nothingness of the universe. So it was very specific, case-oriented non-beings or nothingnesses, and then you have the vast nothingness of the whole universe in which the Tao is situated. So the Tao is both within the universe and within specific things, but the presence of the Tao doesn't change. The nothingness in which the Tao is present doesn't change. And the texts are very clear to say, oh, we have to Xinjai, we have to Zhuang, and we have to clear a space within the heart mind in which Tao can come and reside, right? So if your mind is full of thoughts and worries and whatnot, there's no room for Tao to come and show you the clarity of the world. So there are many instances in which you have this kind of not really a duality, but a multi-layered way of encountering or experiencing nothingness. And it's very hard to say the same thing about being. Maybe you and Mercedes have a different view of that. But for me, being is just being. Ontological being, it's just fanciful thinking, but ontological nothingness, this is the very substance or the very fabric of the universe itself for me. And we find an analogy very briefly in modern day cosmology. And I've not used in my writings yet, but you think of dark matter, right? And more recently, dark energy. So there is an energy that is pervasive in the universe. We can't see it, we can't detect it, but we know it's there. And this is different from dark matter. So this dark energy, this is like the qi of Tao, or you could say it is Tao itself. And dark matter, maybe it's yin and yang, maybe it's you and wu, I don't know. But the point is that it's yet to become manifest. It's yet to appear out of its hidden state, its concealed state, and make itself known for us, right? Because we are sensory beings, so we are limited in what we can know. But just because we can't know, we can't see, we can't sense something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So this is also part of the reason why I'm using nothingness in this way, to draw attention to all the things that are beyond our ability to directly know, to experience, to encounter. And we should, through meditative thinking, contemplation, or other ways of doing philosophy, Mercedes has written 2 books on action, different kinds of acting or resisting to acting, to let things unfold and reveal themselves before us in a
Sorry
very
to remind, like we
wu
are a
wei,
little bit over time.
yeah, very wu wei fashion.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you both, especially again, thanks to Professor Chai's wonderful talk. So let's move to our second round and welcome our second speaker, Professor Valmisa. You have 10 minutes.
All right, thank you, Vivian. And I have to say, I found that nothingness within things and then nothingness wherein things emerge, that I find that very useful. I wonder if there's yet other types, but I'll get to my talk. I have actually prepared a draft. I'm going to be reading from it so that I can make the most of my time and say all the things that I want to say. So I'm going to start with an idea that I think most people will find uncontroversial, which is the idea that there are ways that things are that we cannot simply ignore or that we cannot simply remake at will. In the Zhuangzi, then I'm referring to 2 terms. In particular, one is Tianli and the other is Quran. Both of these terms appear in Zhuangzi 3 in the Cooked-in passage. Quran appears only there, meaning what is already there and so, appearing as necessary. And Tianli actually has a second occurrence in Zhuangzi 14, where it is paired up as a complement to Renshi, human affairs. And therefore, it refers to something that is larger than human social reality, but that does not necessarily exclude it. And then at its most concrete form, Tianli refers to something like the grain of things. Brooks Ziporin parses it as the inherent lines in raw material that guide certain divisions and cuttings most easily and effectively. In the Cooked-in passage, this is quite literal because the cook is following the lines and the configurations in the ox's flesh that allow the knife to pass through without resistance to separate the ox into what seems like natural divisions or natural sections, right? So from here, we get a first claim, which is that not everything goes. There are ways that things are that impose constraints in how we can approach them. Some ways of carving things up will work and others will not. And this already rules out a fully unconstrained form of constructivism or nominalism as a way of reading the Zhuangzi, right? But it is a little bit more complicated than this, I believe, because first, we can never step outside our interaction with things to compare how things really are with how they appear to be. The question is reality perspective independent, or does it change along with our interactions with it, right? Any claim that says that we can decisively affirm or deny such a distinction from the standpoint of the Zhuangzi is going to be dogmatic because we're always already within the interaction. And then second, those constraints are underdetermined and unfixed. Not only diachronically because everything changes, but also synchronically because the same thing can be carved up in many different but equally valid and equally natural ways, depending on our modes of engagement, which are shaped by things like perspectives, epistemic frameworks, perception organs, and biological needs, among many other things. If you want to take the example of a tree that appears in the Zhuangzi, it can be a place to lie down and rest. It can be a sacred space like a shrine or an altar, a source of raw material, a useless object, an ecosystem, a teacher, a visionary, among many other roles. Each one of these identity-forming boundaries are afforded by real divisions in the thing that we are interacting with. So here is the minimal claim that I think Zhuangzi is making, or we can construct with Zhuangzi, which is that there is a Tianli of the tree, but it doesn't fix a single identity. It's sufficiently underdetermined to allow for a plurality of such identities to be formed. But then if we go back to the Cooked-in passage and we shift perspectives within it, we can make stronger claim. The natural and easy lines of the ox for the cook to separate it into pieces in that kind of effortless wu-wei manner are not the same as the natural lines for bacteria breaking down tissue at the cellular level to achieve nutrients from the ox. Those are different patterns of salience in different interactions. There are different ways in which the ox's kuran or tianli appear to different actors. All of them, however, are equally real, and none of them reduces to the others. And that's why the Zhuangzi can say that heaven and earth are born together with me, Bin Shen, which I take not to be a mystical point about some kind of simultaneity in a mystical way, but about co-emergence. What counts at the pattern or structure of things that presents as both constraining and enabling at the same time to me arises together with my mode and possibilities of engagement with them. So the maximal claim would be that instead of a single tianli, we get a multiplicity of them, different but overlapping patterns of constraint and affordance that are relative in the sense of emerging in relation to different life forms, and then within the human species, different epistemic and practical frameworks, different ideologies, backgrounds, perspectives, contexts, goals, etc. This isn't a collapse into subjectivism because reality isn't in our minds, nor can we do with it anything that we want. All of our engagements with reality are constrained by how things present to us as so, structured by such presentation, and in that sense, objective within a given mode of existence. And the tianli of things changes along with how we change as well. So what's socio-materially possible, to use a Zhuangzi's expression, is peculiarly unfixed. Then what we have is a world that presents objective constraints, but is underdetermined and that becomes determinate in multiple coexisting ways, many of which are contradictory. And here is where wu, the notion of nothingness, comes in. I take nothingness to be a way of negating any determination, not because they are wrong, impossible, or unacceptable, but because of the opposite problem. It's a problem of excess, that none of them can ever be exhaustive and universal, right? None of them can be the only one that is right, that is possible and acceptable for everything under all circumstances. So I take nothingness to be a reminder that no single carving of the world captures everything that the world is, as we see in the expressions when the sage is said to be Uji or Umin, or in the expressions of Uyong, Uwei, Ujin, Uzhi, Uyan, and so on. All of these are speculative forms that open up a space to separate ourselves from dominant reductions, which are conventional ways of forming identity, speaking, acting, and to expand possibilities beyond it. Maybe 30, 40 seconds. I think wu is an ontological notion, although we can discuss that, I'm not so sure anymore, that functions methodologically. So it pulls us back from fixation on any one determination to the field of possibilities from which new determinations can emerge. And this is what I'm calling an irreductionist ontology and methodology, which is a term that I take from Bruno Latour. The idea that is that anything can be reduced to anything else, but nothing can be finally reduced to anything else, right? So there is no ultimate layer that is more real or more fundamental than the others, and that settles once and for all what a thing really is. So we have that on the one hand, reduction is unavoidable. We always determinate things as we engage with them, and also we are similarly determined by them. But any final universal reduction is impossible. And then if that's the case, then instead of the question being what is the true way of carving things up, the question should be why insist on any single carving as definitive? And I think that's the question that Zhuangzi is talking, and that guides the discourse on nothingness. So the Zhuangzi's answer to this question is not to stop making distinctions, but to loosen our attachment to them all so that we can make more distinctions, always more of them. So that we can move fluidly across different determinations without treating any of them as universal and absolute, and always returning to that negative source of proliferation of new ones, that is all. It's negative in the sense that it's not a thing, but it's positive in the sense that David was saying, because it is generative. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Valmisa. And when I showed the 30 seconds tag, I actually misuse it. So now it's 10 minutes perfect. Sorry about that.
Okay. And now I'm gonna keep talking. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but anyway, I make the two tags. One is 30 seconds left, and the other is 2 minutes left. So I will just show the tag. You can track my window. Okay, so now let's move into discussion part. So let's first welcome Professor Chai to have the your discussion part for 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mercedes. Yes, you as always give a very rich and stimulating talks. Lots to think about. The idea is stepping outside of one's relation to things in order to preserve a kind of dynamic or unreduced relation with them and with the world. This is a fascinating idea. I agree with it, of course. I myself have talked about, in terms of ontology, stepping outside of being in order to see being, that kind of thing. I say that's really not possible, because if you step outside of being, you have to step into nothingness. So I'm wondering if we're stepping outside of relations, what are we stepping into then? Are we stepping into, as I would say, the non-relational? Because I'm a woo guy, right? Everything is woo. Everything is nothing for me. Because if we're stepping outside of one relation but into another relation, then are we truly stepping outside of relations? So another reason for you and for David why I have this two-layer of Wu, the ontic and the ontological, or the meontological, if you prefer, is because we need to leave behind this ontic realm to achieve true freedom or true clarity of mind. And for me, that requires going back to Ben, to the root of all things, Dao, which is not equal to Wu as nothingness, but within a Wu-based or a Wu-filtered perspective of reality. So a first question to you is, what are we stepping out of and into?
Yeah, so I don't think that we step out of things and into nothingness, because if you say that, then you're turning nothingness into another thing, a place where we can step on, a place where we can turn to, right? Outside of things. I think that we never step out of things, and we don't get out of relations in order to see new relations, but we just reconfigure the relations, right? So if we think, about reality or being in a kind of non-separate and underdetermined, kind of ambiguous way, right? Then any carving up of the world to make determinate beings out of it is possible, right? Or depending on different constraints, as I was saying, different possibilities open up, right? But there are many possibilities, and none of them are more real or more salient than others. But all this salience is dependent on subjective perspective and position, right? But there is nothing in reality that makes some carvings or some relations more real or more important than others, right? Per se, in absolute terms. So what we do is just like to stop like making this line and make a different line, right? So we just reshape the boundaries of things. And that's how, that creativity is possible without ever creating anything new, but just using everything that is already there in a new way, right? So we don't step out of things. We just we move from seeing something as a thing to seeing a thing a little bit different, or something entirely else comes into being, right? And I think
How about non-things though?
Yeah.
Like the Tao. If we describe the Tao as a wu, as a non-thing,
Yeah.
because it's formless and nameless and unknowable and so on, what kind of a relationship do we have with the Tao? Is it a relationship of thing to thing, or is it like second order, third order relationship?
Yeah.
How would you describe that?
No, so I take the Tao like in the Tao Te Ching kind of way, right? So the Tao that is determined is not the Tao that we are talking about, right? So it's the possibility of creation of many multiple coexisting Taos, right? And replacing one with another. That's the idea that we always want to return to, so that we don't get fixated and locked into any particular determinate path. Right. So is that possibility of generation and proliferation that characterizes the Tao as no thing, right? And not being one particular thing, right? That's my take. And that's why I was wondering, as I was listening to you earlier with Davide, and also and I was reading my draft, I was thinking, well, maybe that conception of then is not really ontological, right? In the sense that it is not a thing at all, right? It is real, but that's another discussion, right? Conceptions of reality or criteria for reality. I think it is real, but it's not a thing. So I think it's more of a methodological account of nothingness rather than an ontological one, but I'm not really sure. So I would love to hear from both of you what you think about that.
Yeah. Vivian, one more question or? Yeah. Okay. The idea that for you nothingness is an excess space, is that right? Is that how you describe that? To avoid a kind of nominalistic reductionism. Yeah, this is also very interesting. But for me, the question I would have then is, if it is an excess space, is that space a uniquely human space, or is it the space of Wanwu, or is it the space of Tao itself? Because then you have different levels of excess. And that would affect, when we're speaking, for example, of the sage, which space of excess does the sage locate herself or himself? Because if it's the level of mere things, you and I, that you won't find the sage there. If it's the level of Wanwu, you will find the Junzi there, but maybe not the sage. So the excess space of all things would have to be the space of Tao.
Right.
But how would we describe that, and how can we then say that it's an excess space if Tao is all things yet not limited to anything?
So it's excess in the sense that it overflows any possible description of it that you can make, any particular name or anything that you point at, right? And you say that's a thing, whether it is physical or abstract, material, immaterial, doesn't matter. So it is.
The overflowing isn't overflowing to where, though?
It's
Or we're
overflowing.
getting very metaphysical now.
Not to where, but from where.
From where to where?
So imagine I trace the boundaries of a thing, right? And I say this
Yeah.
is a thing out of the whole of reality. Here is one concrete determinate thing. So to talk about nothingness, to talk about, it's just like the acknowledgement that reality cannot be contained within that thing, right? That those boundaries can be erased and then traced in a completely different way, right? They both are tianli, right? They're both natural patterns or structures in things that can be engaged. So it's the impossibility of fixating just one account or description of reality.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move to the second part of the discussion. David, you're free to join like for 8 minutes.
So hi again, Mercedes. Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I think we agree on almost everything. So that's great. Doesn't happen so often. I will just ask a couple of questions on things that I would like you to speak more about. And so the first point that I had is about a remark that you had that in the end, if I understood you correctly, like Tianli is also unfixed in some ways, also changing. And like, I don't know if my understanding from both the text and like what you were saying, the first part of the presentation is that, no, like Tianli is like fixed, but it's underdetermined. And so, different beings constructed in different ways. But that's not like Tianli itself changing. It's just that, depending on how you construct, you end up having this object as opposed to that object. But Tianli itself is not changing. So in what sense is it changing? And are kind of beings involved in its change?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that question because that's like kind of the core of the difference between the minimal claim and the maximal claim, which is the one that I would like to defend. But I think that I would like to defend, but I don't think that the Zhuangzi provides a sufficient enough defense of that claim. So just to be clear, so this is my preference, that maximal claim, but I think the answer from the Zhuangzi would be that it is to try and even to answer that question is already a dogmatic attitude, because how can we know? Since we're always already in that mode of interaction as being human with, our particular cognitive and perceptual apparatus and so on. Even though we can change our modes of engagement, but they're still like limited, right? We can never engage the ox from the perspective of the bacteria, right? So for us, the things that appear as Tianli are just simply current, right? They're necessary. They appear as obvious, necessary, and so. But then at the same time, we're able to like kind of theoretically position ourselves in the mind or experience of the bacteria and say, well, for them, there is a different Tianli, right? And now the question is it really different Tianli, or is it that the Tianli shows itself differently to different species or modes of engagement? My answer to that is like, yeah, they're different Tianli, really, because reality is completely underdetermined, so it can restructure itself in different ways. I think Zhuangzi's answer is that is a question that we can never provide an answer for because we can never step outside our own experience as humans. So any attempt to give a definitive answer to that question is a dogmatic attitude, and this is precisely what I'm trying to like get you out of, right? But with this text, just like try and be a little bit less dogmatic, if not anything else. So I thought that would be a point of contention with you, Davide. So what do you think?
It is. So but I don't think I would like argue that my interpretation is more in line with the primary text necessarily. Maybe it's a preference on how we construct it. But yeah, what I would say is that Tianli is just kind of objectively there. It's a structure of the world. And then kind of depending on, the features of the agent, its abilities and its purposes and so forth, then they construct the Tianli in different ways. And so the Tianli presents itself in different ways to me and the bacterium and the dog and so forth, but the Tianli is the same.
But
so
is
that's
there
maybe
a perspective independent way of engaging with things?
There is no perspective. Yeah, I would say there is no perspective independent ways of engaging with things. Although, okay, so maybe we can, So what do you think about that? Although, like, it seems that the ideal person, like the Shangran or the Shenran, Zhiran, like for example, Butcher Ding is described as relying on the heavenly patterns in in carving up the oxen, right? So it seems that the person who successfully undergoes the cultivation practices that the Zhuangzi discusses, maybe at least partially, it is able to get closer to Tianli. Maybe not fully, but it's still closer to Tianli than an ordinary person, an enlightened person like me would be. So what do you think about that?
I think that heavenly patterns that Tianli is just like really getting to follow the particular natural divisions in that particular ox, right? As opposed to following directions and following rules, right? Which are like the kinds of things that get in the way of actually responding to the thing that you have in front of you and being able to find like that easy way, right, of cutting it up in this case. So that's the Tianli of the ox right there for the cook. However, like in the example I was giving, like for bacteria, right, the divisions are going to be different just because they have like different physical appearance and different goals and stuff. So then is that what do we gain rather than like we cannot solve this, right? And I think that's what the Zhuangzi is saying. We cannot solve this question because there is no perspective independent way of engaging with things. So instead of asking the question, what is the right way of carving up the world, or is there a real way in which things are that then gets like modified by different perspectives, I don't think that's the question we should be asking. And I think that's what we learn from the Zhuangzi is that that is not the question that matters. What do we gain by asking that question? I would ask you, and then I would say that instead of that question, unless that you have a really good answer that will persuade me that is the right question to ask, instead of that question, the better question is to say like, well, why then get fixated, right? Why, let's try not to get fixated in specific concrete ways of carving the world up, and be able to modify them, right? To engage the world and reality in different ways. But that would be practical guidance, right? And that's a more methodological and practical attitude rather than an ontological question. So I think the ontological issue is just like prompting and motivating the teaching that is actually important. So I'll shut up. So if you have an answer to that question, what do we gain by asking the question about the true reality of things? You have 30 seconds. But you're
You have to unmute yourself, David.
Oh, thank you. So I don't know if I have an answer that will satisfy you. But so I agree that like the point of the text is more teaching us how we should act and how we should act effectively and adaptively. And maybe it is not the case that you have to settle that metaphysical dispute in order to be able to act in the way that the text would like you to do. However, my thought is that since agents act in the world, kind of what it takes to act well depends on how the world is like. And so like it is typically the case that different views about how agency works are going to be paired with different views of like the ontology of reality and the metaphysics of reality. And so that is why I'm inclined to say, oh, okay, maybe actually some of the claims about agency in the text, they must be grounded in certain implicit or explicit ontological views. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, I agree. They are definitely.
Cool. Okay. Thank you again for Professor Valmisa about your wonderful thoughts on this topic. So let's move into our next last turn. Let's welcome Dr. Zappulli. Okay.
Thank you, Vivian. So I would like to share my screen. I have a short presentation. Can I do that? Yes, it seems I can. Okay. Can everybody see my presentation? Okay. So since everybody is an expert on the Zhuangzi here, I would like to do something slightly different from the previous two presentations. I'm going to talk about ontic plenitude and ontic indeterminacy in the Zhuangzi. So what are those? so these are two views from recent ontology. And then what I would like to do is make a point that these views can do some explanatory work in the Zhuangzi, which is very much related to the discussion that we were having. And then I would like to raise the question to discuss with you about which of these views, if any, and maybe, you know, the answer that we just got from the discussion with Valmisa is that we shouldn't ask this third question, but, you know, which of these views actually applies to the text, if either of the two. So two families of views that have been discussed in contemporary ontology are what I call ontologically permissivist views and ontologically austere views. So the permissivist views basically claim that reality contains much more things than common sense would allow. So mereological universalism is one version of that. You know, any set of objects constitutes a whole. Or ontic plenitude, which I'm going to talk about later, is one version of that view. And ontologically austere views conversely argue that reality contains much fewer objects than we would normally say. Mereological nihilism says that no parts constitute a whole, and reality as an amorphous lump is also a version of that view. So both these views reject common sense ontology, but one rejects it in an inflationary manner, and the other rejects it in a deflationary one. Okay. So this is the kind of argument that is often used to motivate both views. So suppose that you have kind of a lump of clay at TA, and then you make it into a statue at TB, and then you make it into, again, a lump of clay by smashing it at TC. Okay? So common sense ontology would say, okay, there is a lump of clay at TA, there is a statue at TB, but not a lump of clay. Then there is, again, a lump of clay at TC. But then if you think about that a little bit more, you start saying, no, but wait, but at TB, all that happened is that the clay changed its shape, okay? And that's still a lump of clay shaped in the form of a statue. So there is a lump of clay at TB. Well, but at the same time, there is also a statue at TB, right? So if you go through this chain of reasoning, you start wondering, oh, okay, so maybe different objects can be co-instantiated or co-located. So this leads to the view that I call ontic plenitude, which has been developed a lot by Megan Fairchild. And she calls it material plenitude, which is why I put a star here, but I prefer ontic, and so, you know, I just go with that. So the view is that whenever there is a concrete object, there are a multitude of other coincident objects that differ with respect to the persistency conditions. So under what condition they keep existing and under what conditions they cease to exist. And these conditions can be characterized, can be spelled out by characterizing what properties the object has essentially and contingently. So let's see this within the example. So take, again, the statue, and you say, okay, so the statue is one object that is here, and the statue has its shape essentially. So if you smush it, the statue ceases to exist. The lump of clay is also here, and it has its shape contingently. So that's a different object that has different persistency conditions. And then if you go like this way of thinking, you say, okay, maybe there is another object, we call it A, that has its shape and weight, essentially. So that's a different object, again, that, you know, if you change the weight, ceases to exist. That's still another object, right? And this, I'm not going to read the passages, but this kind of views tends to be motivated by philosophers like Yablo and Hawthorne, by arguments from anthropocentrism and arbitrariness, that, you know, we're just selecting a bit of the objects that exist in reality, while reality is much more rich. And these arguments, I think, are already kind of resonating with some of the views we find in the Zhuangzi. So alternatively, we have the view of ontic indeterminacy, which has been developed particularly recently by He Jianxing. And he proposes that reality might be indeterminate in all respect. So here I take a more restricted view that applies only to the essential and contingent properties that I was talking about. So the idea is that on the one hand, ontic plenitude says there are many coincident objects that have different modal structures, different essential and contingent properties, while ontic indeterminacy says, you know, reality is indeterminate with respect to modal structure, and we're just kind of constructing it from our subjective perspective. All right. So now we apply this to the Zhuangzi. We consider a story that you all know from the first chapter. Huizi goes to Zhuangzi and says, the king of Wei gave me a present, this big gourd, and it weighed more than 200 pounds. Okay, so I tried to make it into a water container, it was too heavy to lift. Tried to split it to make it into a spoon, but it was too big to scoop into anything, so I destroyed it. And Zhuangzi says, "Oh, your mind, my friend, is so tangled up, you should have used it as a vessel to float into the rivers and lakes." Now, what is cool is that my take is that we can model this story through these two ontological models that I've introduced. So, for example, you can say, well, the bottle is the kind of object that is essentially light enough to lift, okay? And the ladle is the kind of object that is essentially small enough to scoop into things, while the vessel is the kind of object that is essentially big enough to board in it. They have different persistency conditions. And so you're going to say, well, we can interpret the story as follows. So Huizi is depicted as kind of failing to act well. Well, why? Okay, well, if ontic plenitude is true, then he fails to act well because he fails to discover one of the objects that was present in front of him that he could use. While if ontic indeterminacy is correct, then his failure is a failure to construe or to construct the model structure, to construct reality in an effective way. And for Zhuangzi success, you're gonna do it, mutandis mutandis, kind of changing success for failure. More generally, Huizi and Zhuangzi agential attitudes in the text can be captured by the terms Wei Shi, deeming right, and Yin Shi, deeming right, adaptive right. And also these attitudes can be understood through, or partially understood through, these two ontological frameworks. So we're going to say, well, Wei Shi, like deeming things with our judgments, our pre-learned and judgments, is problematic because, well, if ontic plenitude is right, because it obscures the variety of objects existing in reality. You're just accessing the objects that are compatible with the judgments that you already know. You don't access the other ones. While if ontic indeterminacy is correct, because it prevents agents from freely constructing model profiles. Again, what properties are essential and what are contingent. Conversely, Yin Shi, adaptive right, is effective because if ontic plenitude is right, because it allows agents to access the variety of objects existing in reality, and if ontic indeterminacy is right, because it allows agents to freely construct these model profiles. So finally, I just raised the question, both ontic plenitude and indeterminacy can do interesting explanatory work, but does the Zhuangzi embrace either of them? So I think there are four options. One option is that ontic plenitude is correct. Second option is that ontic indeterminacy is correct. Third option is that it is underdetermined, like the text actually doesn't rule one way or the other. And another option is that it actually embraces a third view, that it has similarities with those, but it's actually different. And so some terms that I bring in, but we already had a long discussion to address this question, are Tianli, so the heavenly pattern, which sometimes I think that it might go in the direction of ontic plenitude. There is kind of objective structure of all the objects existing in reality, and then by taking a certain perspective, we are filtering out all the objects that we are not selecting, and we select one, right? And then also a term that the Zhuangzi sometimes uses to describe reality is da kuai, like a big clump. And this instead goes quite strongly, I think, in the direction of ontic indeterminacy. Finally, a passage that I would like to draw your attention to, one of the many chapters in many passages in chapter 2 about Shu and Fei, goes as follows. So this is also that, and a that is also this. And there, from one standpoint, they say this is right and that is wrong. Here, from another standpoint, we say that is right and this is wrong. As a result, is there really a that as opposed to a this? Or is there really no that as opposed to a this? So again, here, the first sentence of this passage, and this is also a that, and that is also a this, seems to take the ontic planetary direction. Both objects are there, and then through perspectives you are selecting them. But then the conclusion of the passage, is there really a that as opposed to a this, seems to be a rhetorical question that says, no, it's not that they're actually there. It's just that you're doing your own thing as an agent and you are constructing reality in a certain way. So which one is correct, if any? That's one of my questions, but we can talk about other things too. And thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, David. Okay, let's start our discussion part. Let's first welcome Professor Chai for 8 minutes.
Maybe Mercedes can go first.
Yes.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to go
Okay,
first.
okay.
Yeah, so I think we're going back to the same question, right? To Tianli. It seems like if you're reading Tianli in the way that things are, independent from engagement with other things, then it seems that ontic plenitude would be the right approach to it, right? Like the closest description, right, of the position that Zhuangzi is taken there. But if we read Tianli in this other way, in which the way that things are, the features or patterns or structure or divisions, cuttings, however you want to call it, of things that are salient to us are constructed along with our engagement with things, and that does not make them or makes it any less real, then there is a multitude, a plurality of Tianli, right, that can be constructed, that can become salient in different situations. And then ontic indeterminacy or ontological ambiguity, because I'm not sure if there is really a difference between those two positions in the way that you described it, would be the closest one, right? I know that you prefer the first option. And I know I prefer the second one, right? But beyond personal preference, for the sake of making this conversation relevant for everyone else in the audience, Tianli appears twice in the whole of the Zhuangzi, twice. Once in the inner chapter, chapter 3, and then chapter 14. How important is that term? Are we reading too much into that term? Do we have any other evidence, whether it is terms, or anything that tells you or can tell us that there is really that Zhuangzi is actually defending a perspective independent way in which things are, that is then, however, multiply accessed and multiply constructed through different perspectives? What would be like your go-to passage or concept in the Zhuangzi beyond Tianli to argue in favor of that?
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes. So first of all, a point that I want to mention is that I might be sympathetic, as you said, with the ontic plenitude reading, but I also think that, like, even if you take the ontic indeterminacy reading, like, you still do not get that anything goes, because unless you take the kind of ontic indeterminacy unrestrictedly, so to speak, right? So, like, if you take a more moderate version, which is the one that I would be inclined to, like, you still have that there are some maybe objective properties out there. So that would be the Tianli, right? And then you construct these properties in different ways, but the properties are what is stable, right? And then what is indeterminate is how you construct them. So both with ontic plenitude and ontic indeterminacy, you can get something that is stable if you're inclined to go that way. But it would change. Like, what changes is what is stable, and then what changes is that if you go through ontic plenitude, then you get an kind of epistemological reading of what it is to change perspective. Like, you're accessing different things that are actually out there.
Yeah.
While if you go to your ontic indeterminacy way, you get a more metaphysically charged understanding where you're actually doing some construction. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just what like to clarify what I took to be the implications of the two views. And then to answer your point about what would be my to-go passages. Well, the Tianli does come up only, yeah, as you said, 2 or 3 times in the text. It comes up a bit more if you also look for Tianzhili. So with the Zhi in the middle, there are other like 5 or 6 passages where it comes out. So, and I take those two to kind of be synonymous. So I would agree that it's not one of the main concepts of the text, but I still take it to strongly suggest that, you know, reality has this subject independent structure. So one passage that I wanted to mention is in chapter 12. So I always forget if chapter 12 is Tiandi or Tiandao. I think it's Tiandi. But anyway, in chapter 12 there is a story that I take it to be a story of the generation of all things. So it says something like, in translation, in the beginning there was nothingness, and nothingness was Uyo, so without existence, and Wuxing, so without a form. And then there came to be the one, so the one still doesn't have form. And then from there, blah 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 blah. And then at a certain point it says, so there are things, there are U, and U develop their respective patterns, Li, not Tianli, just Li, and that are their respective forms, Xing. So it seems that, like, one way in which I'm inclined to read that passage is that is as providing a kind of definition of Li as, or Tianli maybe even, expanding a bit, as kind of the sum of all the Xing existing in reality, right? So all things have their Xing, that's their form. And then the totality of Xing is the heavenly pattern. And then the heavenly pattern is also such that you can construct it in different ways. So that's how I would read it.
Yeah, I think that might well be the case, right? And like with everything in the Zhuangzi, it might also, the opposite might also be the case, because we might be able to find, you know, another equally relevant passage to say the opposite. So I don't know. So one thing that I don't like about ontic plenitude in the way that you have described it as an option for the Zhuangzi is that it makes a distinction between essential and accidental or contingent features when it comes to identifying things. And I think that is very anti-Zhuangist. You know, that's like at least my personal like intuition. Like any such binary construction or distinction can be useful, of course, and we do make it, but then you have to know when to leave it behind and not to really believe in it, right? So like really separating, you know, features into essential, and there is something essential about things and something accidental. That so if you agree with that intuition, then that also makes us link back to the idea that saying that there is just this one way in which things are, it doesn't seem like a claim that the Zhuangzi would make in any kind of absolute way. Only
So again, in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, and then persuade me of the scenario. No, but it could make the claim and then undermine it immediately after, right? And then leave the question because there is no answer to it that we can give there, right? I think.
I do agree. I do agree with you that the essential contingent distinction is something that the authors of the Zhuangzi would at least kind of raise their eyebrows about. So that I take that to be a reason to, well, one of the reasons that you can have to prefer the ontic indeterminacy view, because for the ontic indeterminacy view, the what is contingent and what is essential is a function of Wei Shi.
It changes, yeah. And it changes. We can make different Wei Shi at different times, right?
Right. But it does make sense that within a particular Wei Shi, you have essential and contingent properties, right? So that would be a reason to prefer ontic indeterminacy, I think.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, so let's shift gears. Professor Chai, over to you for your response for 8 minutes.
Yeah, not really sure how to respond. David is a very, dare I say, analytic style of Taoist philosophy, which is a bit alien to me. As you know, I'm more phenomenological and whatnot. But still, two things that come to mind. The question of what is essential versus what is indeterminate. Yeah, I think in a Zhuangzian way, we can say what is essential to all things is mm, I mean, is it life? Is it the physical form of things, the body of things? Or is it something ostensibly indeterminate? For example, qi or yin and yang. I think Zhuangzi would be more interested in that question than in whether physical property something is essential or not, because you and Mercedes and those in the audience all know physical form is not the essential aspect for us, right? Tao happens to give us this particular form, but this particular form is constantly changing. So how we portray it, view ourselves, the world views us, is constantly indeterminate. This is all, in a Roger Amesian sense about roles, perception. But even for us, from first person point of view, we ourselves cannot know fully what is it that our body is, right? Because as I said before, there are aspects of it that are beyond our ability to know at a very large scale or a very minute scale. So I don't think Zhuangzi would be interested in the physical determinate or indeterminate aspect of life. So that's one thing that came to mind. The second thing, your analogy of the lump of clay, yeah, I love that because that I think very visually, so that's something I I can understand immediately. Of course, we can speak of Lao Tzu's clay vessel and all of that. But a lump of clay, and then you form it into a thing, and then you smash it, and so on. Yes, we have the story of the gourd. We can also say the story of Zhuangzi, carpenter, others, woodworkers and whatnot, chopping down trees and making things. For Zhuangzi, what is important, of course, is not the physicality of the wood, the beauty of the tree, and so on, but the ability of the tree to be carved into bowls and other vessels and bell stands and what have you. So this also with Mercedes Butcher Ding Cook Ding story, I read them in the same way. It's about the self-unfolding nature of all things. That is what makes them indeterminate, but also is what allows them to change and evolve and transform throughout their lives. So we are not lumps of concrete. We are essentially lumps of clay. We are living lumps of clay, and we are molded and shaped not only by the world, but by ourselves and by the Tao, even though we are unaware of that. I think for Zhuangzi, what he would want us to do is to think about that. Rather, not the outcome, but about the cause, the root. Why is it not that why am I human, but what am I able to do with the innate skills that I have as a human, and how can they allow me to flourish in the world? What obstacles or barriers or challenges will they pose to myself, to the world? How can I respond in a way that doesn't cause self-injury or injure others? Now, whether my determinate or indeterminate state induces an effect for better or for worse on others, that's not really my responsibility. So the case with the virus or what did you say, Mercedes? I use the virus example in my class. Um, the purpose of a virus is to consume the host, right? This is how it survives. So it doesn't care, oh my God, I'm killing the host, boo-hoo, I'm a bad evil person or evil thing. It just does what it does. This is its 自然而然 nature, right? And it unfolds in a Tianli manner that is completely natural to it. So for us as outsiders, we have no grounds to judge a virus for being a virus, for fire burning and consuming things to fuel its propagation, its existence. So for clay, the fact that it has this innate ability, to be molded, but like water, to return to its original unmolded, unshaped self. I think Zhuangzi wants us to think more about that and less about, okay, what kind of a beautiful statue or value laden object, in a Lacanian sense, the vase. Oh, it's beautiful, so we give it monetary worth, and then we all chase after it out of greed and whatnot. Zhuangzi is warning us against that, right? So if anything, we shouldn't make ourselves into beautified statues or ontically or ontologically determinate things, but we should be free and flexible and flowing in the indeterminate state. Now, whether that state is a state of presence or being, or a state of non-presence or nothingness, I think that's up to the reader to decide for herself. But just two observations. I leave time for you to respond.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, I actually like, if I understand you correctly, I think that we agree about a lot. Like, I agree that the point of the Zhuangzi is this capacity to adapt and to be flexible to things and to go with the transformation that are always happening to the form that you have, but is unfixed, right? So, I don't know, just like, what do you want to comment about? So one point is that I would say that there are some kind of essential features of things in the text. Like if by essential you mean something that happens to every things, right? So for example, it's essential to things that they transform. Okay, so transformation is like a universal feature, right? And I think it's also essential to things to have form. Not to have the particular form that they have, that's always going to change it, but it is essential to be a thing to have a form, right? And then, like for the point of, how do we act and what do we do? Like the question that I'm trying to get to, and you might be right that it's not in the spirit of the Zhuangzi to be fixated on this question, but the question I would like to get to is, when we are adapting and we are, as we make the example of the tree, carving the tree in different ways, understanding in different ways, and acting adaptively, like, are we discovering a richness that is already there independently of us, or are we completing, like if you want to use a Chinese term, are we chung an underdetermination that is there? Like which one of the two, right? And I'm like from a point of view of ontology, I'm interested in which one of the two is correct, if any. And just last point, I apologize for coming to you through all the analytic background. Like actually, like one thing that I like about doing Chinese philosophy is that since we have the primary text as a common ground, like we can have different, secondary literatures and then still be able to talk to one another. So this is actually fun for me. I hope it's fun for you as well.
Yeah, it's just I'm a bit stupid when it comes to analytic vocabulary. So, of the two, I would say the first is probably the better one. I think Zhuangzi would say it's very arrogant of us as humans to presuppose we can bring completion to anything, because we cannot even bring completion to our own selves. So it's about the innate, the hidden, the concealed potentiality of all things that is there in waiting for us to discover. Now, how we discover and what we do with that discovery, whether it is for natural ends or artificial ends, I think Zhuangzi would be more interested in that than whatever the final product of our discovery is. Maybe Mercedes has something to say to that.
Okay, yeah, I think we are a little bit over time for discussion, but we can save the
Well,
discussion
let her
for-
respond very quickly, 30
Yeah,
seconds.
Okay.
I have a really fun thought actually. So, if I was thinking if the number or the options of things that we can discover is unlimited, then there is really no difference between discovering and constructing in those two models. It only makes a difference if the options of things to be discovered is limited. Then it does make a difference.
Cool. Yeah. Never thought about that. Yeah, you're right, I think.
Right?
Yeah. I'm gonna think more about that. Yeah, it's a cool point.
Me too.
Hey, so big thanks again to our speakers for their insightful talks, and also thank you, Dr. Zappulli. David, I really like your talk. Okay, so I think we aim to wrap up today's section at 11 a.m. So we still have around 20 minutes. So let us just wait for 1 minute to see if there's any audience wanna propose some. Oh, I already see the hand. Yes, so if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand so I can name you. And if there's no hand, feel free to just jump in. Okay, Nicola. Okay.
Thank you everyone for your talks. It was very productive and interesting. I'm a PhD here at ECNU, and I was just wondering, listening to your talks, when we speak of Tianli, because for example, if we go read Guoxiang commentary, he speaks of 自然之理 and not of Tianli, and this I think is very interesting because when we speak of Tianli, I think also maybe because of language, it seems that we directly would lean towards a more substantial understanding and a more Neo-Confucian maybe understanding of this Tianli. Well, maybe if we take it 自然之理, it seems much more directly understandable as something that is emerging, a self-so field that emerges through the interaction. I think this is very interesting in a sense. And this takes me to the point also of the Cook Ding chapter passage where he says 以物后入有间, and there are two moving parts here which are interesting. I think this 以物后, like using something which is absolutely without thickness of presence to enter inside something that has space for emergence, space for novelty to emerge, and for relationship to emerge in a sense. So I think it's interesting. Do you think it's can be interesting and productive to understand Wu as something that, first of all, as absence of of leaving traces in the emerging field of relations? Just for example, like the Dao's process of Zaohua, right? Dao doesn't leave traces in the way it creates, it actuates reality in a sense. And in the other sense, if Wu can also be understood in a sense of like the absolute unknown, I would say, of expression. In the sense, there's something is always expressed, but there's also something, it seems to me that there's also always something that it's underlying that expression. And it seems to me that the Taoists would say, yeah, but we will never know that the underlying something, what it is. What is it underlying it? But there's something that allows expression. So I would like to know your thoughts about these two things, about Tianli and about this last thing. Thank you.
Let me start. So I think that was very, very well said. And the Guoxiang commentary, I really appreciate that, because that self-so field that emerges through interaction, that's precisely the idea that I was pointing at, that it could be something that makes itself apparent and necessary in that moment, but it's emerging along with me, right? It wasn't there to be discovered by me, but it's in the interaction between the features of that thing and how I perceive and construct that features that something really emerges as having a necessary structure and something that I can take advantage of, right? Or I can like bump my head against. But then I wanted to say also, you said, because you said there is something underlying, and that underlying, it's again like that language to me already signifies that there is like something essential, something profound that cannot be discovered ever, right? That it's beyond our understanding and limited, brains as humans and so on. And I don't think that's the point. The point is not that there is something else there that is underlying, but that there is like an endless possibility of redescription, right? And that's also what I meant by there is no space to step outside of relations or of being. It's just like new configurations of being, like new relations being made rather than stepping out into a zone that is profound or mystical or, yeah.
Hey, I see Jordan, your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. Ditto on everything that was just said about the excellent talk. And my question won't be nearly as sophisticated as what was just asked. And one more caveat, I apologize if you've mentioned this in your talk. Your talk was really great and fruitful, so I may have missed parts of it, but why do you guys find that the Zhuangzi is concerned with nothingness? At the beginning, Dr. Chide talked about Plato, and it seems like in that case he's responding to Parmenides and potentially Heraclitus, or like the atomists have to explain change and movement, or there seems to be a reason why we have to talk about these things. Why does the Zhuangzi need to?
Yeah, that's in 1 minute, not possible to answer. Why? I think because for him in his time, the general assumption is that everything is produced by heaven, and that there is nothing beyond the realm of heaven. In which case, Tao exists and is limited to heaven and earth, right? Is a tianxia entity. And if that's the case, then Taoism as a tradition of thought would be unable to surpass Confucianism, or Moism or legalism or anything. All of which believe that Tian is the highest realm. So if you want to espouse a source or a create or what an agent, whatever word you want to use, that is ultimate, that is superior, in a zhi sense, or ji as the ultimate, then the Tao needs to be beyond. But the beyondness of Tao cannot be disconnected from Tiandi and Wanwu. So rather than getting into a transcendent immanent kind of dualism, which we see in Western thought, Taoism would say, well, how do we explain the origin of all things in a way that is not mystical, or in a creation ex nihilo kind of way? And that is to say, well, Tao is everything without being limited or bound or influenced by anything. It is in the world. It's within all of us. We cannot know it directly. We know it indirectly, but it's there. So it's responsible for the four seasons. It's responsible for heavenly patterns, natural principles, all of that stuff. But we are not able to explain it. And because the Confucians try to explain it, the Mohists try to explain it, and so on, they are somehow, their way of thinking is missing key elements of reality. So if you say everything comes from being and all things can be traced back to being, then it's a very, it's like a one-way ladder. It's a one-way road. And it becomes very easy to critique. And Zhuangzi's challenge, and one of the things that makes him hard to study and to teach, is he tries to remove all conventional ways of discourse, of asking questions, of answering questions, because he wants us to probe not at the level of thinking, but the level of thought. He wants us to observe the world rather than merely see the world. Because we are within the world, we are part of the world, we belong to the world, we need to observe it from within, from our own position, but also from the position of the sage, which is the position of ultimacy, seeing all positions as equal, as one, as indeterminate. And the only way you can do that without being subjected to the kind of criticism that the Confucians, the Mohists, and legalists and the logicians are lobbing at each other is to say, we have a thing that surpasses all knowable things. So nobody can touch it, nobody can question it, because there's always an unknown, right? As Nicola just not to say that there's something underlying or beyond grasp. It's just that we are in our form, literally, physically, mentally unable to know it. We are limited. So that's what makes us different from all other things whose own natural limitations and inabilities makes them different. So collectively, all of our limits and so on, we can't put them together and say, this is then what is the Tao? Because there's still going to be something somewhere that is beyond our grasp. So nothingness serves as a starting point to flip the question on its head and say, let's not look at things from the point of view of other things. Let's look at all things from the point of view of non-things, of no things in a Buddhist sense, non-things in a Taoist sense. This is a very subtle but important distinction, right? Because then you see things as they naturally are. You see them within the space in which they exist, within which they coexist with others, how they change, how they interact, how they are dependent upon all things. And you can't do that at the Greek level of being to being interaction. It needs to be, for me at least, a non-being to being interaction, because non-being as the root or the source or the foundation from which all beings arise and generated from, go through their changes and then return to, right? So that's ground zero. That's our datum point. And it can't be the Tao, because then you can point, and Zhuangzi says this, if you point and say, this is the Tao, why? Because we know the principle of all things, and they all trace back to the Tao, and the Tao is, blah, 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 blah. Then you can critique him, right? And you can deconstruct his argument. So it's kind of a safety net to say, my discourse is at a level that transcends all human discourse. So only the sage is able to discuss what is the Tao, because the sage has also transcended the limitations of human discourse, language, concept-based argumentation. Zhuangzi is, I think, more than that. And this is what, for me, makes him more interesting than Lao Tzu. But to let David and Mercedes reply, I'll stop there. You guys want to jump in 30 seconds?
If possible, I actually wanted to say a brief comment about Nicolas' question before Vivian. Is it fine?
Yes, go ahead.
Are you still there, Nicolas? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
You're Italian, right?
Yeah.
Okay, ciao. So no, I just wanted to say that I'm not so sure how reading Tianli as Zhuangzi Li would change the interpretation. So I mean, it changes the interpretation if you take Tianli to be something heavenly and therefore otherworldly, right? But as I understand it, and I think as Mercedes understand it, and others like Frank Perkins, that in Tianli, the really opposite of Tian is Ren, it's humanly, right? So in my reading, heavenly pattern is basically non-human dependent pattern, is so in the sense natural pattern, right? And so that would be would lead to a kind of straightforward connection with Zuren. Also, the passage from Butcher Ding that you were mentioning, it's using both terms, right? So it says I forgot all terms, but it's relying on heavenly pattern, Tianli, and then going with Wuzhi, Wuzhi Ziran. So yeah, the way things are in themselves, and adapting to what is Guwu, firmly so. So it's like it's treating all this as kind of going together. So yeah, that's just a comment that I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, so I see. I think we have around like 8 minutes left. So let's first go for a comment in the group chat. Okay. So I wonder if you would call Zhuangzi an Eastern phenomenologist to an extent. Okay.
David, Mercedes. I think everybody knows my answer, so I won't say.
Can you explain why? Sorry,
go
can you explain
ahead.
why it would be a phenomenologist as opposed to, or in exclusion of others, or as well?
Well, I wouldn't say he's exclusively a phenomenologist. He's many things. But yeah, I would say he's more phenomenological, let's say ontophenomenological, than say logical or epistemological, that kind of thing. Even his discussion of language and knowledge can be read in a ontophenomenological way. But you and David,
I want to hear David.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I would go reading the Tianli as Wuhua. So okay, so I guess that there are, you can take Tianli maybe in a more restricted sense as kind of the structure of the world as I would go, but you can take it in a more broad sense as also including the principles that govern the functioning of the world, like natural laws in contemporary terms, right? So if we go in the second reading, then I guess the Tianli would include Wuhua, would include like transformation as one of the principles that is governing the world. But I don't see any way of reading Tianli as just Wuhua, like straightforwardly. So that I just don't see.
I agree with that. I think Ohua is a feature of the feature of transformation that plays a role in how we co-construct Tianli along with things. That would be my take on it. So we change, and then the things also change, and also we can adopt different perspectives, modes of engagement with things. So all these changes affect, in my view, how we construct Tianli. In the minimal view, how we perceive it, but not what Tianli is, right? After all. And I do agree with the second part of the question, that Zhuangzi would be more concerned with practical issues than with ontology or metaphysics. But that does not mean that there is not an ontology in the Zhuangzi that can be discussed and reconstructed, and that is important to also make strong arguments when it comes to the positions that you take in how you read the political thinking of the Zhuangzi or the philosophy of action. So these questions that we were discussing with Davide about dialectic indeterminacy or plenitude, they actually change things, right? That position, which position you take, they can change things in how you read the practical teachings, right, in the Zhuangzi, whether it comes to social philosophy or political philosophy or ethics. So it matters.
Okay, so I think we can go for Kevin's question. And Kevin, can we trying to finish your turn within probably 4 minutes, and then we can move to Wendy's comment. Oh, Kevin, we couldn't hear you.
Sorry, my unmute didn't work. I said I think they already answered Wendy's question, so hopefully we don't have to return to that. But anyways, I have thank you all for your talks. And I have two kind of questions. The first question is very straightforward. Neither, unless I misheard or didn't hear, none of you spoke about negation or negating. So I would like to know your thoughts on understanding Wu as a process or an activity of negation, negating, rather than nothingness, non-being, so on and so forth. And then my second question, if we have time to get to it, is about the history of Wu as a concept in Chinese philosophy. And what I think is an interesting fact that pretty much post Guoxiang, there is a sustained anti-Wu attitude, an anti-nothingness attitude. And you get it in the Song Dynasty, you get it all the way through Wang Fuzhi, and even people like Xiong Shili, and modern interpreters like Zhang Dai, who are saying there is a relative yo and wu, something and nothing. But then when you start talking about an absolute nothing, well, that's contradictory. And so I'm curious if you have any ideas on this kind of phenomena within this anti-Wu phenomena in in the history of Chinese philosophy as well. So thank you.
We have 2 minutes to reply.
I think, Kevin, you're familiar with the Huan Tuan's Wujitu, right? So that Wujitu, if I remember right, was Tang Dynasty. So this precedes the Taijitu that Zhuxi adopted from who Zhou Dunyi, yeah. So the Wujitu, the Wuji is the ultimacy, yeah. Besides Wujitu in the Tang Dynasty, all Zhuangzi commentaries have discourse, and Laozi commentaries have discussion of Wu, not in the sense of negation, but in this kind of positivistic sense that I have been describing. Now, in terms of so-called mainstream philosophers, yes, you are right. There's nobody really after, I wouldn't say Guoxia, I would say after Cheng Xueying, although he's still a commentator. But mainstream thinkers, there's nobody who picks it up and says, yeah, Zhuangzi, he was on the money. This is right. For the simple reason, well, in Buddhism, Wu is a negation. It's kind of akin to Kong or to Xu, so it's a negation. Neo-Confucianism, it's the same situation because they are adopting the Buddhist way as a way of putting Taoism back into kind of private religion, private philosophical thinking status, right? You don't want Taoism to be a challenge to Neo-Confucian orthodoxy. In terms of Wu as negation in the roundtable today, I can only speak for myself, but I don't view Wu as a negative, unless it's used specifically in a grammatical sense, and then it's akin to the idea of Bu or Wu, that Wu. I only use it in this ontological, cosmological sense when it's paired with yo, or paired with a thing to talk about the thingliness, if you like, of said thing. So my brief response would be that.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Professor Chess. Response. Okay, let's move to Wendy's comment. So Wendy's comment is that can we interpret this way that Tianli in the Zhuangzi refers actually to the notion of wuhua, transformation of things, rather than xing, the properties of things which are subject to change during the transformation process. If we take the historical background where the Zhuangzi is composed, can we say that Zhuangzi is more concerned with worldly affairs such as governance and socio-political relations, of self and other, rather than the ontological concerns. Because the story of Cookding is how Cookding govern the other. Okay, can we kind of like our speakers use 2 to 3 minutes to reply, and then I can let Paul come in to wrap up.
By the way, I think that I answered Wendy's question before instead of Rosalia's question. So I apologize to Rosalia, but I don't have much to say about phenomenology. So yeah, I already answered Wendy. Go ahead, Mercedes and David.
Yeah, we addressed that question already. I think I already said what I wanted to say about that question.
Cool. Okay, I think then it's perfect timing for Paul to wrap up.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I don't have anything particular to say. We've been putting together a number of roundtables, as some of you might know, on the Zhuangzi this spring. And this is another excellent example. So if people are interested, next week there are actually 2 more roundtables on the Zhuangzi, and then another one the week after. So this was really, really excellent. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, I can see you guys next week maybe.